They weren't dying to German tanks. They were dying to hedgerows. In the summer of 1944, the most powerful army on Earth was being beaten, not by the Wehrmacht's firepower, but by the French countryside itself. And then, one mechanic, with no engineering degree, no authority, and one impossible idea, changed everything in just 48 hours. What he built from scrap metal turned a broken tank into an engineering legend and may have saved the Normandy invasion. June 1944, Normandy, France. The Allies had stormed the beaches, cracked Hitler's Atlantic Wall, and paid for every inch in blood. But once they pushed inland, victory stalled. The rolling French farmland that looked peaceful from the air turned out to be a fortress on the ground. A maze of small, sunken fields separated by massive hedgerows. Bocage, the locals called them. Thick banks of earth, stone, and tangled roots, some centuries old, shoulder high or taller, often lined with trees that shaded the roads like green tunnels. To a farmer, they marked property lines. To a German defender, they were perfect ambushes. To a tank crew, they were suicide. Each time an American Sherman tried to climb one of those embankments, the tracks would rise, the hull would tilt back, and for 2 seconds, maybe 3, the underbelly of the tank was exposed. That's where the armor was thinnest. And on the other side, hidden in the shadows, German gunners waited. They didn't need to aim twice. Every time a tank tried to cross a hedgerow, one gunner later recalled, "We'd just wait for the belly to show, then fire once and watch it burn." By the end of June, whole platoons were being lost in the fields around Saint-Lô and Carentan. Tank after tank lay burning in the Norman sun. And the offensive, the one that was supposed to push the Allies toward Paris, had ground to a halt. Panic doesn't start with shouting. It starts with silence. Commanders stopped promising daily progress. The maps on headquarters tables blurred with eraser marks and question signs. The men called it the Green Hell. Every hedgerow was another fight. Each field had to be cleared, each mound climbed and crossed under fire. Engineers tried everything: explosives to blow gaps, bulldozers to carve lanes, artillery to flatten the walls, but nothing worked fast enough. Even when tanks did make it over, their tracks often hung in the air, leaving them stranded like beached whales. The Germans waited for exactly that moment. One anti-tank shot, and another Sherman was gone. The Allied High Command faced a nightmare no manual had prepared them for. They had overwhelming power, but no way to move it. Every attempt to break through just created more wrecks. And somewhere among those stalled columns, amid the acrid smell of burnt oil and cordite, one sergeant began to think differently. His name was Curtis G. Culin of the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron. Before the war, he'd been a mechanic in New Jersey, a man who lived by touch and sound, not by theory. He could tell what was wrong with an engine before opening the hood, simply by listening to how it breathed. He wasn't a strategist, he wasn't an engineer, but he had something the textbooks didn't teach. He understood how machines behaved under stress. You can imagine how people saw him, one soldier remembered. The tanks are burning, and here's Culin, sitting on an ammo crate, sketching triangles and lines in a notebook. He looked like a mad scientist in a war zone. Culin had noticed a pattern no one else had put into words. The tanks didn't die because they were weak. They died because they were fighting the terrain the wrong way. The hedgerows weren't barriers. They were puzzles. And every puzzle has a solution if you stop trying to brute force it. He realized the tanks didn't need to climb the hedgerows. They needed to cut through them. That thought, a simple shift in geometry, would change the entire campaign. But to test it, he needed permission, and that meant convincing his commanding officer, Captain Samuel Morrison, to let him take a damaged Sherman, a handful of scrap metal, and a welding torch, and deliberately drive the tank into a wall of earth. To understand what Cullen was proposing, you have to understand how a Sherman tank moved and why the bocage was killing them. Each hedgerow was more than just vegetation. It was a living fortification, centuries of compacted soil bound by roots and stones, sometimes as much as 10 feet thick and 6 feet high. When a 30-ton tank hit that wall, the tracks started to climb. The front rose, the rear dug in, and at the peak of the climb, the belly, the soft under armor, faced the enemy. For a German gunner armed with a Panzerfaust or an 88mm cannon, it was the easiest shot of his life. Cullen's plan reversed the problem. He scavenged pieces of steel from destroyed German beach obstacles, the Czech hedgehogs that had once guarded the Normandy beaches. Each was a cross of heavy steel beams welded together to stop landing craft. To Cullen, they looked like raw material. He cut them apart with torches, sharpened the ends, and welded them to the front of a Sherman. 4 prongs, each as thick as a man's leg, spaced evenly across the lower glacis plate, angled slightly downward, like the tusks of a metal beast. The idea was brutally simple. Instead of riding up over the hedgerow, the tank would drive straight into it. The prongs would dig beneath the root line, slice through the earth, and lift just enough of the mass to let the tracks bite. The tank wouldn't tilt. The belly would never show. It would chew through the wall, not climb it. Simple physics, Cullen said later. Leverage, weight, and momentum. Once you understand what's really holding you back, the solution usually looks obvious. The first test took place just after dawn. The field was quiet, except for the low rumble of an idling engine. A handful of officers stood nearby, watching the strange, pronged machine they'd nicknamed Rhino. Most of them expected a disaster. Cullen stood beside Captain Morrison, arms crossed, jaw tight. He'd run the numbers, tested the welds, prayed the theory would hold. But theory didn't stop bullets or embarrassment. If this failed, he'd be remembered as the fool who crashed a tank into a hill. "Ready?" Morrison asked. Cullen nodded. "Let's find out." The driver revved the engine. The tank lurched forward, gathering speed. 30 tons of steel slammed into 10 feet of earth and root. The impact thundered across the valley. Dirt exploded into the air. For a moment, the tank stopped dead. Then, slowly, almost impossibly, it began to move forward again. The prongs bit deep, cutting and prying, the roots snapping like gunfire. The tank's nose stayed down, the belly hidden. With a roar, it broke through to the other side, the first Allied vehicle ever to punch through a hedgerow instead of climbing it. The watching soldiers erupted in cheers. One officer simply said, "Holy hell, it works." But Cullen wasn't done. The real test wasn't against dirt. It was against the enemy. The next day, his modified Sherman led a live assault against a German position. Machine guns opened up from the far side of a hedge. Cullen gave the order. Through it. Full speed, the tank hit hard. Earth flew, and then daylight. The gunner already had the enemy in his sights. One high-explosive shell silenced the nest. Moments later, they faced something far worse. a German Panther, hidden behind another hedge. Its gun could turn the Sherman into molten scrap with a single shot. Retreat wasn't an option. Cullen's command was steady. Hit the hedge at an angle. Don't stop. Keep your front to him. The rhino surged forward, cutting through the mass of roots, bursting out nose first. The Panther's gun was still swinging when the Sherman fired. The round hit its side armor, and the German tank erupted in smoke and flame. The impossible had become ordinary. Word of the rhino spread faster than any official order. Within a week, General Omar Bradley came to see the strange contraption himself. He watched one modified Sherman carve through 3 hedgerows in a row, then turned to his officers and said, "Get me 500 of those, now." By the end of July 1944, hundreds of tanks across the 1st and 2nd Armies had been fitted with what became officially known as the Culin Hedgerow Cutter. When Operation Cobra, the breakout from Normandy, began on July 25, 1944, 3 out of every 5 Sherman tanks rolled forward with steel tusks. They didn't climb, they carved. German after-action reports recorded the confusion. Enemy armor now passes through hedgerows without exposing vulnerable areas. Method unknown. Within days, the American advance accelerated. Units that had measured progress in yards now moved miles per day. The bocage, that green prison that had trapped the invasion for weeks, was finally broken open. Cullen's idea became doctrine. Field manuals added instructions for welding the cutters. Factories back in the States began shipping new tanks with mounting points pre-installed. But the invention's value went far beyond Normandy. In towns, cutters were used to punch through stone walls and wooden barricades. In winter, they cleared snowdrifts and pulled wrecks off frozen roads. During the Battle of the Bulge, tank crews even used them to shove abandoned vehicles out of blocked passes, keeping supply convoys alive. Everywhere the rhino went, it turned obstacles into options. Still, innovation in war always carries a shadow. The same breakthrough that saved lives also cost others. With tanks moving faster, commanders launched bolder offensives. Some units advanced too far, too quickly. Cullen himself wrestled with guilt. He told a chaplain, "I built something to save men from dying in tanks, but it also made killing more efficient. I don't know how to feel about that." The chaplain answered softly, "You can't control what others do with your creation. You just made it possible for fewer men to burn alive. That's enough." Over time, the hedgerow cutter became invisible, part of the landscape of war. Future soldiers saw those prongs as standard equipment, never knowing they'd been born from one man's sleepless 2-day experiment. Captain Morrison once said, "You know an invention worked when people forget there was ever a problem." By the time Allied tanks rolled through Paris and crossed the Rhine, Cullen's cutters had become symbols of adaptation, reminders that the difference between stalemate and breakthrough can be just a few inches of steel welded in the right place. Today, in museums from Normandy to Fort Knox, you can still find a Sherman with Cullen's steel teeth welded to its nose. Visitors pass by, maybe pausing for a photo, unaware that those ugly, rusted prongs once turned the tide of a war. They look crude, 4 jagged beams jutting forward, but in their simplicity lies genius. Curtis Cullen went home to New Jersey after the war. He returned to fixing cars, living quietly, never chasing recognition. When a young historian found him decades later and asked if he understood how important his invention had been, Kulin just smiled. "I wasn't special," he said. "I just saw something that wasn't working and figured out how to make it work." He died in 1963, largely forgotten outside military circles. But every time a soldier adapts, every time an engineer looks at a battlefield and says, "There has to be a better way," the spirit of that mechanic still echoes. Because war, like life, isn't just about brute force. It's about the people who look at an impossible wall and dare to build a way through. And that's the story of how one crazy idea, born from a broken tank, a few pieces of scrap steel, and 48 sleepless hours, became one of the simplest, smartest, and most important inventions of World War II. If you want to hear more untold stories of ordinary people who changed history, stay with us, because sometimes the quietest minds leave the loudest marks.